Hello everyone. Today we will discuss what is the problem with inflation. Now this may sound trivial, but you will notice there are ways to address inflation that may make it less of a problem, but still there are some less noticed uh, parts of inflation that we may want to deal with. Now that of course requires us to have a proper definition of measuring inflation. So inflation, first of all, is a general increase in prices across the economy. So it is not only your local purchases, it is not only one or two goods. When we say inflation, we are trying to refer to a general increase in prices across whole economy. So the commonly used consumer price inflation is the measure by the percentage increase in the cost of representative basket of household goods and services, usually over a year. So what we're speaking of here is that there's a basket, an imaginary basket, imaginary in the sense that this includes some goods and services that we think the average consumer is consuming. You could be, in fact, the average consumer that's actually consuming all these goods and services, but it is just to address typical households' survival needs and also some luxury goods. Of course, this depends on the or changes the weight, if you will, of different items. So not all goods affect the price of this or the overall index in the same way, which you'll see in a second with different calculations of the consumer price index. So the consumer price index is measuring the general level of prices that consumers pay for goods and services. This includes the consumption taxes. And the basket of goods and services is chosen to reflect the spending of the typical household, right? So when we say an imaginary household, that's what I'm trying to refer to. This doesn't necessarily mean that you are necessarily using all these goods and services in this basket, but this is just to try to match the typical household's consumption patterns. So for this reason, the change in CPI or CPI inflation, we call it, is often considered to measure changes in cost of living, right? So you can, again, imagine the cost of living differs from person to another. But if you were to imagine a typical person's consumption behavior, CPI is going to inform us about the cost of living for the typical household. So the consumer price index is based on what consumers actually buy, and the goods and services in baskets are weighted according to a fraction of household spending they account for. So that's what I mean by luxury goods. They don't always constitute the larger fraction. So CPI is going to put more weight on the goods that are, or goods and services that are capturing a larger part of your spending. So it could be your mortgage, your rent, and other things. So housing could be a large fraction of this. And CPI will exclude exports, which are consumed by foreign residents, but includes imports, which are consumed by the households in the home economy. So if the imported goods are becoming more expensive, it is going to be reflected in CPI. And to calculate the rate of inflation, we need, to take these three steps. Find the cost of the basket, right? So we look at the cost of basket of goods and services. So what's the cost of that? Compute a price index using these, prices, the costs, and then use the CPI to calculate the inflation rate from year to another. So let's try to do here, an example. We have the goods given here, right, in the first column. So what do we have? Bags of rice, pieces of chicken, carrots. These are going to be what we're consuming for, each year, right? So how many is here the quantity that we consume? We have the unit price and total cost, right? So for 2020, the unit price, 2021 unit price, and 2022 unit price. Notice the prices will change from year to another. So if you're consuming 2 units, so 2 bags of rice in each year, the first year, 2020, 2 times 10, you pay $20. Well, 2021, the price of bag of rice increased to $12. So 2 times 12, now you're paying 24. And 2022, the per bag price became $13. So 2 times 13, you're paying $26 for the bag of rice. Now, this doesn't match all the prices, right? So you have, 5 pieces of chicken that you consume for $3 per piece, let's say. So 5 times 3, 15. but the unit price became $5 and $8 in later periods. So you see an increase of $25 to $40 as years pass by. With carrots, you're consuming 20 of them, and unit price is 50 cents each, or pounds, who knows. So 20 times 0.5, $10, it's increasing to 75 cents, and then $1. So again, the prices are increasing in general, right? So here we didn't see any cheapening as far as I can see. We had 10, 12, 13, 3, 5, 8, 50 cents, 75 cents, and $1. So things in general got more expensive. So 2020, this basket cost us $45. 2021 cost us 64, and 2022 cost us $86, right? So first thing we do is to calculate the price of the basket for each year. Now next, we will calculate an index, right? So the CPI index is going to be the basket's price divided by basket price in base year times 100, right? So here, the basket price, if we take the base year as 2020, so let's say basket price in the base year is also $45, right? Because we took the 2020 as the base year. So 45 divided by 45 times 100 is going to give us 100. Now, in 2021, we found the basket's price to be $64, but the basket price was $45. So divide these two with each other. So 64 over 45 times 100, 142. And we do the same for 2022. So you see the basket price became $86, but the basket price, the base year price was 45. So you divide 86 with 45 to get 191 here. So if you notice, the inflation is going to be the year you pick. So let's say 2022, last year, 2021, divided by last year again, times 100. And you can easily see with CPI, the prices from 2020 to 2022 almost doubled, right? So you have 100 here, 190 here. So you will see a very large inflation in this particular example. Another way of looking into this is using the GDP deflator. So the GDP deflator is a price index, just like consumer price index, but it tracks the change in prices of all domestically produced final goods and services. So instead of basket of goods and services that consumer buys, the deflator tracks the price changes of all the components of domestic GDP. That is going to be including consumption, of course, but also investments, government expenditure, exports minus imports. So it includes exports, which are produced in the home economy, but it's not consumed in it's not consumed necessarily in home economy, but it excludes imports, although we are consuming imports. So it's not as ideal. So GDP deflator can be also expressed as the ratio of nominal to real GDP to give us the price index. And the GDP deflator series is most commonly used to transform a nominal GDP series into a real GDP series. Now, I think it should be clear from the calculation we made that the inflation calculations can come up with some bias. Already talking about GDP deflator as an example of a price index, we saw that it's excluding imports and including exports. But a better known problem, if you will, with measuring inflation is something called substitution bias. Now, notice when we say cost of living, right? So we are trying to indicate the cost of living using the consumer price index that is made out of a basket of goods and services that we think typical consumer consumes. But the problem is, of course, as things become more expensive and quality changes, people substitute from one to another. So they may still feel well off, despite the fact that prices change considerably. So when prices are rising across the economy, the price of certain goods may nonetheless be rising faster than the price of other goods. And in this case, consumers are likely to change their consumption patterns, shifting away from goods that are more rapidly rising in prices. This could happen with groceries, where you can find different substitutes, rather easily to a particular thing that you buy if it's getting more expensive than other things. So if we were to just keep the same basket from one year to another, we will probably miss the changes in prices in that way. So the CPI uses a fixed basket and doesn't account for changes like this. And there's one way of addressing this, so allowing the basket that is consumed for a typical consumer to change over time. We can account for changes in purchasing patterns, and that we call the personal consumption expenditures price index. This is a more widely used measure of inflation, particularly in the United States. There's also another thing to keep in mind with regards to the measures of inflation. So quality also changes. Not only that people substitute from one good to another, the type of quality or the quality of the type of goods that we consume also changes through time. So dealing with the quality changes when constructing a price index like CPI is referred to by economists as hedonic quality adjustment. So hedonism here is referring to pleasure seeking in the philosophical rather than everyday sense of the world. Now, we have defined inflation as the price level increasing, so a positive change in consumer price index. We will define deflation as the price level falling. This is going to be a negative CPI change, so the growth rate of CPI becoming negative. And disinflation, this is still positive change in CPI, but in a lower rate, right? So let's say the prices were increasing by 5%, now they're increasing by 2%. That's going to be a disinflation. So scale of positive CPI change reducing. Now we can come to discuss what's wrong with the inflation, right? So we have introduced how to calculate CPI and using that how to calculate inflation. And it's clear that there are problems with using inflation or consumer price index and some other measures to calculate the cost of living. But if we can pass that for a second, the consumer price index going up, the the average consumer that we think is consuming becoming more expensive, is an issue. So inflation is something that we are worried about because it affects real incomes, right? So if your income is not increasing as fast as prices, then you will probably lose purchasing power. In fact, that is in the most clear sense the definition of loss of purchasing power. So there are winners and losers from inflation, and depending on what people consume, the source of their income, so if it's wages, profits, or transfers, and how quickly wages, benefits, and interest rates adjust to price increases. And if you're a net lender or borrower. So these are all going to matter if you benefit or lose from inflation. Moreover, inflation is costly even to those whose real incomes increase because it makes future prices uncertain, exposing people to risks, and that will make them feel worse off. And a stable low level of inflation can still be preferable. So we made a lot of claims in the slide, and that's going to become a larger debate in later sections in this unit. But let's start with discussing inflation in terms of winners and losers of inflation. So let's say a shift in inflation from 2% to 8% took place. So this will, we will argue, create some winners and losers. This happens through three main channels. So the first one is the matter of wages. As many of you can guess, particular workers that are working for salary, they would rebargain or renegotiate their wages in most instances annually, right? So you sign a contract, and for a set period of time, again, usually annually, you are bound to work at that wage unless you don't, quit your job. So firms normally adjust their prices following the wage setting round. In an inflationary environment, this means the real wage, what can be purchased with the nominal wage, is falling through time. So let's say you signed your contract this year and you will be working for the same company for a whole year, and you're working for the same nominal wage, that is a set amount that you get paid every month, but the prices are increasing in that process. If prices are increasing by 2%, maybe you wouldn't feel that much. But if the prices have increased by 8%, then you will feel that a lot, and you will be able to renegotiate only at the end of the contract, only at the end of the year. So you will lose a lot in this period. This is, of course, a very commonly shared concern about inflation. And some people, on the other hand, are borrowers, which means they owe more money than they lend out, right? So that would be the net debtors. And some are net lenders. A household with a mortgage, for example, is borrowing, right? They have a mortgage with debt, and many also they can be also a lender of some sort if they have a saving account. Depending on the size of the mortgage and the saving account, they can be a net lender and borrower. But the crucial part here is that the interest rate set by a bank on a mortgage or saving account is a nominal interest rate, right? That means that it is not changed when inflation changes. So you sign, let's say, a mortgage deal, or you made an agreement with your bank for a savings account. You made an agreement for, in most instances, a nominal interest rate that says you give an X amount and we give you X times 1 plus R. Now that return rate R is what you agree on, but this doesn't necessarily say something about the inflation rate. At least in most instances, it doesn't. So the amount that you pay or receive in interest is fixed in money terms. Then if you're a net debtor, an increase in inflation is good for you because it reduces the burden of the debt repayments, right? So let's say you were owing an fixed X amount, right? And with interest rate, it was going to become X times 1 plus R. Okay, you know how much you have to pay at the end of the whole process. But if inflation is increasing and it's now from 2% to 8%, you know the purchasing power of money is much less. So it's easier for you to let that amount go than before, right? So whatever X plus 1 plus R, X times 1 plus R is, before this change in the inflation rate, maybe that money was more valuable in the sense that it was able to purchase more, but now it's able to purchase less anyway. So you may consider, paying or making these payments somewhat easier. So conversely, if you're a net lender, you lose from inflation because fixed nominal repayments you get by less in goods and services. So people with investments tend to dislike inflation particularly because of that. So poorer and richer households consume also different baskets of goods, right? So when we are in an inflationary environment, we should keep in mind that inflation hits particular goods faster and easier, which tends to be in the poorer households basket. So in an inflationary episode, prices may rise most for basket consumed by lower income households. There's a study from European Central Bank, and the publication shows that households in lowest income groups in the euro area experienced an effective inflation rate 2 percentage points higher in September 2022 than the highest income groups due to having a higher budget share spent on electricity, gas, and food. Now, notice when there's an inflationary pressure in the economy, it's hitting matters like energy, gas, food more than everything else. And if you're a high income household, chances are you own your house, you don't have any mortgage payments, you're not paying rent, so you don't really get impacted by such changes that much, and it also has a large impact on or differentiation, if you will, how different households are impacted by different or inflationary periods. And this is not only a matter of poor and rich. You also see young, middle-aged, and older, so particularly retiree households experiencing inflation differently, mainly because their basket is different than the rich households, and their incomes tend to be fixed in nominal terms, right? They won't be able to rebargain and change their income as the prices are increasing. Now, what about deflation? We discussed a bit about why inflation may be worrisome. Deflation is a sustained fall of price level, as we said, and this could be undesirable for many reasons that inflation is also undesirable. And there are other problems with this as well. When prices are falling, households will postpone consumption, right? So if you have the belief that you want to, buy, let's say, something durable, like an expensive item like fridge, screens, cars, and everything else, and you're thinking that, well, they will become more, cheaper in not so distant future, you can stop consuming today. And as we have discussed so far, this will mean that there's going to be a decline in demand, right? So you are thinking you will buy this in the future, but everyone else is thinking the same. So demand today is less. And if there's small demand today, as we have seen with the multiplier model, there's not going to be much production, capacity utilization, and employment, and that will have a negative impact. So a prolonged recession caused by weak aggregate demand is likely cause of deflation, right? So when there's less demand, we see a lot of correspondence to, if you will, lower prices and decline in the price level. And this could become even worse if spending decisions are also postponed by households.